I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. How many times over the last 24 hours have you uttered those words? What about over the last 24 days? What about the last 24 decades? If you are like a lot of women in the world, chances are you have said, I am sorry, way more than you ever need it to. It's a thing, it's an epidemic. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Why we as women tend to over apologize, the impact of that on our confidence, on our lives. I'm going to share some specific examples of what situations do we tend to apologize in, and tips for how to break this habit and words that you can use instead of the I'm sorry. So that's where we're going today, because the biggest first step is shining a light on this conversation, on these words, so that you can have more awareness of when you're saying them. And this is not about judging ourselves. I'm never going to come from a place of judgment, because judgment doesn't help us make different choices or change anything. Judgment just keeps it more in place, like we've stuck a lot of gum around the edges. And so it's harder and harder for it to release and become something else. So we're all about bringing kindness and curiosity and compassion to ourselves, to this journey together. So I want to clarify too, I'm not talking about getting rid of saying I'm sorry in those situations that really call for it. But chances are 9 times out of 10, you might be apologizing for something that you do not need to at all. Story for you. I had a client many years ago, let's call her Janet, who in our first several calls together, each call was an hour, she would apologize half a dozen times, sometimes a dozen times. And they were most often for things she did not need to be apologizing for. So I might say something like, hey, did you get that GDoc I sent you? She'd be like, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have it pulled up. It's okay, you don't need to apologize. Or we'd be scheduling the next call, and I'd say, hey, what about next Tuesday? And she'd say, oh, I'm sorry, Tuesday doesn't work, but what about Thursday? And I was like, you don't need to apologize. And so through our coaching together, we really got to get into this with Janet and look at, she was born and raised in Australia, where they have an expression that you don't want to be the tall poppy. The tall poppy is someone who stands out above the rest, stands out above the crowd like a tall poppy. And a tall poppy was a bad thing. You wanted to fit in and be at the same level as everyone else, whether that meant be as mediocre as everyone else or be the same as everyone else. Don't shine your light on yourself to share that you've just, won an award, or don't bring any undue attention to yourself. Don't share any accomplishments or anything that could be considered as assertive or confident behavior could be viewed and judged as aggressive, as bragging, and worthy of judgment. And basically, what would you do with a tall poppy? You'd cut it off. So it basically loses all its bloom. So she grew up in this environment where that was the implicit and the explicit messaging that she received. So whenever she was expanding beyond her comfort zone, whenever she was perceiving herself as taking up space or somehow infringing on someone else's space or time or energy or anything, it became just this innate knee-jerk reaction for her to say, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. So the more that we worked together, the more that she began to bring awareness to this habit and really start to look at those underlining, like there was, yes, the cultural conditioning that had impacted her sense of self-worth and relationship with her voice and confidence. And so she got to the point where it was like she was so proud of herself because she was willing to share her accomplishments, and she was no longer afraid of being the tall poppy. Instead, she was like, I'm going to be the tall poppy and encourage and empower other women to be that as well. So how cool is that? And yet it started with bringing her attention to it. So today, let's support you in bringing even more attention to how it might be showing up in your life. And my sense of you is that if you're listening, obviously you're listening or watching this show, you are savvy. You have invested a lot of time and energy in personal development, in your own way of being in the world, so you can move through the world with more confidence. And my sense is this is one of those things that even the savviest among us, even those of us who have spent decades working on ourselves, this is still one of those things that persists because it's part of our language, it's part of our habit. And the cultural conditioning, okay, I didn't grow up in Australia. I didn't have that messaging, and you may not have either had that messaging of don't be the tall poppy. However, women in general across country lines have been taught, we've been raised with the conditioning, with these societal expectations to be agreeable, be pleasing. We've heard things like don't speak up, don't be seen. Instead, be submissive, be supportive. And when a woman speaks up, as I was sharing in the story of Janet, there she runs the risk of being seen as aggressive or bitchy versus assertive, as her male counterpart would most likely be. And we've internalized these beliefs and these trainings about what a woman should be and what she shouldn't be. And so we do it as our own safety mechanism, as a coping mechanism to stay safe, to fit in, to not be that tall poppy that runs the risk of being cut off. And apologizing, over apologizing, can also be something that we do, a strategy that we do to avoid conflict. Because again, in our conditioning that has done a great job with cultivating codependent relationship patterns, we've learned to avoid conflict because we've associated conflict with something bad, something wrong, something dangerous. And conflict, we've misidentified conflict as being this, it brings up this fear that we're going to lose connection. And so rather than run the risk of losing connection with another, which we equate to our safety and security, we avoid conflict. And so those words, I'm sorry, can go a long way in bridging that, in soothing any potential conflict. And then when we're saying I'm sorry, when we hear the other person say, oh, it's okay, we get this dopamine hit in our brain, and those words, I'm sorry, are so familiar. It's running a super highway in our brain that's very common. And so again, these are just some of the reasons why we can find ourselves over apologizing, and why even when we begin to shine a light on it more and have more awareness, be gentle with yourself in the process of playing with these different tips and language that I'll be giving you throughout this episode. Be gentle with yourself, because there is this pathway in your brain that's very familiar and comfortable with saying, I'm sorry. It's just habit. Like you might not ride a bike for years and you pick it up and there's body memory, right? There's like memory stored in you for how to say, I'm sorry. So creating these new pathways can take a while, and it takes repetition and continued practice. So be gentle with yourself, okay, in this journey. And let's look at, because it's so important to look at, you may think, well, these are just two words that I'm saying, right? Like, what's the big deal? I'm saying I'm sorry, we're moving on. I avoided conflict. It's not a big deal. It doesn't really have an impact on me. And yet it does, because the impact is there's this unconscious and conscious story that we as women end up telling ourselves that erodes our confidence, that creates this low self-worth, this sense of, well, I'm not worth taking up time or space or energy, or I've done something wrong that I need to apologize for. So even notice like the body language as I say this, if you're watching the video on YouTube, or even notice this in your own body, if you're listening to this, or either way, it's like when there is this apologizing occurring, there's this caving in, there's this submissive quality. Think about the dog that cowers in the corner, feeling like I've done something wrong and I'm going to get in trouble or I am in trouble. I'm not saying you're a dog. I'm just saying sometimes it's helpful to see these somatics, these body movements in others besides ourselves, because it is in ourselves becomes so the water that we swim in, it can be helpful to see it outside of ourselves. So if you look at that dog, that body language, it's super contracted and constricted and drawn in. And so after a lifetime of feeling like you need to apologize for yourself and literally apologizing for yourself, it impacts the body structure. So there's this way of moving through life where there's constriction and a sense of limitation, and the full potency and power and energy of you doesn't have the space to move about. It's like a garden hose with a knot in the middle of it. You've like successfully disconnected from your power and your potency. And guess what? As I've shared in other episodes, and I will in the future, all of this is the purpose behind the societal conditioning, the cultural conditioning, these expectations that have been ingrained in us, is that we are more controllable when we are being submissive. We are able to be dominated more, and we are less of a threat to the status quo when we feel the need to apologize for ourselves, rather than moving through life unapologetic, unwinding that garden hose, no more knots, not being the dog in the corner that's cowering, and instead moving through life, even flaunting our fabulousness, because there's no need to apologize for ourselves. And so flaunting may seem like, oh my God, that's such an extreme. That's so obnoxious. That's so just like, who wants to be that? Well, I invite you to play with that and play with that contrast of what is it like to move through life when you're apologizing all the time, and what is it like to move through life when you are open, your heart is open, your pelvis is open, your whole body is just like open, and you are moving relaxed and confident, not needing to prove anything to anyone. You're not flaunting to get attention. I'm using that phrase because I get a sense it might tickle some edges for you, which is always a beautiful thing to do. Because when we're playing with contrasts, when we're playing with exploring these new ways of being and new behaviors, it can be so helpful to look at the contrast and then play with, well, where is the middle ground? So maybe, and it also helps stretch you out of the contraction into something that is so far beyond this flaunting that then when you relax, you might fall someplace in the middle. Or maybe it doesn't feel like flaunting. It just feels like you are unapologetically being you, being present and potent and powerful, not over apologizing, not unnecessarily apologizing, and enjoying existence. So play with that and see the difference that you notice, and you'll see the impact of the over apologizing is like, imagine when you're moving through life in this constricted place, how does that show up? Like how you show up in your relationships, in your business, in your relationship with money, with sex, with orgasm, with pleasure, with intimate conversations where you're speaking truth. Like if you're over apologizing, chances are all of those things are a fraction of what they really could be in the full expression and the full abundance of your life. So let's get into, to help you see this even more clearly, And I'm not going to apologize for taking a drink out of my mug that another client gave me that says, "You are not crazy. You are a goddamn cheetah," from the book Untamed by Glennon Doyle. I highly recommend it. So I created this top 10 list of things women often apologize for, but don't need to. I'm not necessarily going to read through all of them today because there's something about like listening or watching that a top 10 list of 10 things, that's a lot to take in. So I'm going to read about half the list. And then if you want the full list, along with the top 10 list of what you can say instead of apologizing, come join our private Facebook group called Live Your Yes. I'm going to post each of these in the files section of our Facebook group. And then you can also be joining in with community to explore these conversations, to have a safe space where you can talk about this, where you can raise your hand. I'm a recovering over apologizer, and I'm here to change that. And having community and support is so powerful. So I just want to let you know, this is like an excerpt of more. If you want more, join the Facebook group. Okay, in all different ways, more of all the things. Okay, so let's look at this. Things women often apologize for, but you don't need to. 1, being heard. Women apologize for speaking up or asserting their opinions as if their voices are an inconvenience. And as I'm reading these, see if you recognize yourself in any of these. And remember, instead of judgment, just acknowledge it, make a note of it. Okay. Number 2, taking up space. Apologizing for existing in a crowded room or inadvertently being in someone's way. Isn't that the most ridiculous thing? I've done that. And then when I catch myself doing it, I'm just like, oh my God. Where it's like, I'll walk around the corner in a crowded shop and someone else bumps into me, or we bump into each other and I say, I'm sorry. Or even not that, like someone bumps into me because they're rushing to get somewhere in the airport or, you know, the store, and like they bump into me and I'm the one that says I'm sorry, or you're the one that says I'm sorry. Again, it's so ingrained. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. I was in your way when you were in a hurry to get to the plane. And it's like this, oh my gosh, I'm existing. I'm taking up space. I'm sorry. And there can also be a third thing that women often apologize for is expressing emotions. Saying I'm sorry for displaying emotions as if feelings should be hidden or suppressed. I remember, this breaks my heart. I remember sitting around the kitchen table with my family. We were all still like young. Maybe I was a teenager at the time. And my mom started crying because one of our cats died. And she was sharing this story with my dad, I think, because he didn't know yet. And then she apologized for crying. And oh, that moment just breaks my heart to remember that. Because at the time, it wasn't in my awareness of like, Mom, you don't need to apologize. I don't remember, how I responded in that moment, but it was just like, Mom, one of our cats died. Of course you're sad. Of course we're all grieving. It's okay to cry. It's okay to have that expression. Or a woman might get really passionate about something. I have these moments all the time. You might get really passionate. Maybe you're in a team meeting. Maybe you're at in a gathering of people or something, and you get really passionate about expressing yourself. And then you feel like, oh, I'm sorry. I got a little too much there. Again, there's no reason to apologize. So that was 3, expressing emotions. Number 4, setting boundaries, apologizing for setting a boundary, as if prioritizing your personal needs is not okay, as if it's some kind of burden. And tap in and tune into this for a moment. Like when you've set a boundary, I had a client just the other day sharing with me how she so often sets boundaries she wants to be working on her business at certain times. And then overruns her own boundaries when someone else asks her to do something. And it's like she's saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was going to prioritize myself and my business right now. You have some need and request. Well, okay, I'll tend to your request." So that gets into a conversation about people pleasing that I'll be exploring more of on a future episode. Yeah, let's just run with this example of like, have you ever set a boundary and then felt apologetic of like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't help you right now because I have a phone call," or "I'm sorry, I'm not available to do that because I've done this thing. I've, taken this time for myself." And apologizing when there's no need to. You haven't done anything wrong. It's more of like, "Oh, that'd be great. I'd love to help you." I'm getting into giving you language for what you can say instead. So I'm jumping ahead. Let me reel that back without apology to just move into number 5, is asking questions, like apologizing for asking a question as if seeking information is an imposition. Like, "Oh, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that again? I didn't get it. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you say we're meeting on Tuesday or Friday? Oh, I'm I'm sorry, but I'm wondering if you're asking for that from all of us or just me." It's like, oh, this is so common that we do this. So common. So again, check in with yourself. Did you recognize yourself in one or more of these? Being heard, taking up space, expressing emotions, setting boundaries, asking questions? If so, you're not alone. And again, if you want the full list, that's in the Facebook group. Hop on over, it's free to join, and it's a great community of women to be a part of. You can see all 10. Yet, let's talk about how to break this habit. Now that you're beginning to see it more, and become more conscious of it, again, like that's the first step, becoming aware of it. And then you want to bring curiosity to it. Why did you apologize? Begin to learn what is driving you. Often it's an unconscious motivation. And so when you're bringing more consciousness to the saying, "I'm sorry," now you're bringing more consciousness. You have the possibility to bring more consciousness to what's motivating, what's driving that choice that's been unconscious. And you can start to look at, "Oh, I apologized because I was avoiding conflict and it just seemed easier to say I'm sorry rather than to actually have an honest conversation about it." Or, "Oh, I said I'm sorry because actually it was just a total default response. I was going unconscious and operating on autopilot." Whatever it is, the more you can bring curiosity and compassion to it. Again, this is one of those things where it's like we're starting on the surface with our language, yet when we dive deeper into this exploration of our psyche, our reasoning, our body, these give us doorways into changing this pattern. So, and when you get more present with your motivations, that also gives you more doorway, more insight into, "Oh, okay, I've been believing that conflict is bad to avoid. What else is possible here? How could I avoid, how could I perceive conflict in a different way? What if I could view it as an opportunity for both parties or all parties to actually grow closer and actually create some safety together to share more of what's true for us, and through the process create greater intimacy together?" Oh my gosh, if I was viewing conflict in that way, I no longer would need to avoid it. I could actually lean into it with this curiosity and this excitement for, "I wonder what we're going to learn about ourselves and each other in this situation." Now, I know that making that shift from avoiding conflict to actually leaning into it, it's one thing to say it. It's another thing to get to the point where you can actually do that. And getting to that point often looks like getting support, working with a coach or a therapist, where you're actually unlearning that default pattern of avoidance and fear and relearning this other possibility. And that takes both the inner work of healing those old wounds and hurts about when conflict wasn't safe. And there might be trauma in there to heal. And then there's also learning this new language, this new way of speaking, this new way of being vulnerable and brave. And the more that you do it, again, practice and learn from it, you're cultivating more confidence and more willingness and ability to navigate these kind of conversations. So I want to let you know, I acknowledge what I'm sharing with you today are some really practical tips that you can be in action with, and it can really help to get additional support. So again, always, I'm here for you. There's always links in the show notes for how to get support with me if, beyond these episodes and the Facebook group, you're like really seeking that additional support. So just know I've got you, I've got your back. Links are in the show notes for how you can get more support from me. So once you're bringing more awareness to these, the saying, I'm sorry, what's motivating you, you could practice saying, here's a great bridge phrase that instead of I'm sorry, you could start playing with, excuse me. Excuse me, I have a question. Oh, excuse me. Looks like you're in a rush to get somewhere. Let me slide over here so you can get by me. Or let me sit over here so you can grab your suitcase because it looks like you're trying to catch a connecting flight. So play with that because now you're used to saying two words. I'm sorry. So by replacing that with excuse me, it can be like putting training wheels on your bike. You're giving yourself a way to practice this that can be an easeful transition into using other kinds of language. So as you play with this different language, here's another reminder. It can feel really uncomfortable and unnatural. You may be so used to apologizing that not apologizing may feel like I'm being such a bitch. I'm being really aggressive here. So again, this is an invitation to lean into the discomfort and to remind yourself, oh, I'm going beyond my comfort zone and I'm going beyond the status quo. And that is going to feel uncomfortable, yet it is not a sign that you're doing anything wrong. It is not a sign that you should stop doing what you're doing. It's a sign that you're actually doing something that is more honoring of you. So hang in there because eventually you can get to a place where it'll feel uncomfortable if you apologize when you don't need to, and it will be feeling more natural and more at ease to do it, to say something else, excuse me, or, oh, I love that you thought of me, but I'm not able to join you for that. No apology needed. So another great tip to help you break this habit of over apologizing is, as I mentioned earlier, to share about this more in a safe community, whether you talk about it with your girlfriends, whether you join our Facebook group, Live Your Yes, having other women to talk with about this who are also committed to this journey of deconditioning. You can also call it rewilding, untaming, and really coming home to ourselves and our power. It's so helpful to know that you're not alone. You're not crazy. You're a goddamn cheetah, and you're committed to stopping this habit of over apologizing. Okay, so let's get into some things that you can say instead of apologizing, that some of these include the excuse me, some of them go beyond them. So that first one, being heard, that we talked about, like apologizing as though your voices are an inconvenience. Instead of saying, oh, I'm sorry, you can say, thank you for listening to my perspective. That's a totally different energy, isn't it? That exudes confidence, exudes gratitude. That's so much more magnetic. Hello, feminine magnetism. So much more of an invitation. It doesn't erode your confidence. It doesn't erode that self-worth. Instead, it bolsters your confidence, your sense of worth, and it invites a completely different kind of response from the people you're talking with. And this is something I actually want to speak to. This came up in a conversation in a group coaching call the other day with a group of women. I was so glad one of my clients brought this up. She's a super powerful neurotransformational coach, and she was talking about how, hey, we also need to address here how we train other people how to respond to us, which is so 100% true. So if you've been in the habit of over apologizing, people expect that. So when you start saying things like, thank you for listening to my perspective, you might get some double takes. You might get some like, huh? You might be shaking the boat of the status quo, which has ripple effects on other people. You might be able to perceive their discomfort. Who's this confident woman that's no longer cowering in the corner? So be aware of that. All the more reason to get support so that as you are unlearning these patterns and learning new, more confident, more embodied, more powerful ways of being and showing up, your outer world may be reflecting back to you, that's not okay. We like the old version of you. So it is essential to recognize this for what it is. Their reality, you are shaking up your reality and their reality. And there might be people who don't like it. Please do not let that be a reason that stops you from moving forward, claiming your authority of your life, claiming your commitment to no longer over apologizing, and getting support and having community where you could talk about these things and unpack them and have that space to express what comes up for you emotionally around it and get support with whatever mindset shifts might be required to really be able to navigate that terrain with more confidence and more of your own knowingness that you are freaking fabulous. And it is absolutely 100% okay to be rocking the boat. Because aren't you here to be a wave maker anyway? Hello. All right. Number 2, what you can say instead of apologizing. So when it comes to taking up space, you can say, excuse me, or simply hold your ground confidently. I have another fun somatic exercise for you to do, optional home play. My sister introduced this to me years ago. I freaking love it. This is how it goes. Say you're walking in, it's got to be like in a like sidewalk or in the mall, or I haven't been in a mall in so long, but I know they exist. Malls, sidewalks, anywhere where you're outside walking. You could be at an outdoor concert this summer and like walking around, milling around in the crowd, like near where the food and the drinks are, like not like necessarily, anyway, anywhere in a public space. In the past, chances are, look at this, see how this has shown up for yourself in your life. When you're walking down the sidewalk, when you're walking down the hallway in a mall, and someone is coming towards you, is your tendency to move to the side or to stay the course and let them move? It's kind of like a game of chicken, It's like, oh, are they going to move or am I going to move? I double dog dare you to do this at least twice in the next 5 days, because otherwise it's easy to forget. Go for a walk and don't move from your path. And it's going to feel uncomfortable and it's going to feel aggressive. I get it. But here's the deal. It is going to rewire something in your system that is profound. Profound. And the other person, even if they're looking down, do not move. You might stop. If they're looking down, you could do the double points bonus home play and stop in your tracks and say, hi. At some point, they are going to look up though. Let them move. Let them say, excuse me. Let them have a response to you being unwavering in your pathway. So play with that and see what you notice, see what you discover, and share about it in the Facebook group when you do that. I'd love to hear from you. So taking up space is a big way. Expressing emotions. Instead of apologizing for them, you can express your feelings with I feel statements. Like imagine if my mom were sitting at the table, at that kitchen table way back when, and this is not a judgment of my mom. This is just to use this as a great example. And I love my mom and I love that cat. And I was super sad that she died and that my mom died. And so imagine her being able to say, I feel really sad that our cat died today. Yeah, totally. We're all feeling really sad. And her acknowledging that would have given us permission. Again, this is not a judgment on my mom. This is an opportunity for us right now, going forward, to have these moments where when we say, I feel really sad my cat died today. I feel really sad because fill in the blank. It's like we give other people permission to acknowledge how they're feeling too, unapologetically. So that's number 3. Number 4, setting boundaries. And this setting boundaries can be a whole series in and of itself. So more on that in future episodes. For now, instead of apologizing for having set a boundary, you could say, I appreciate your understanding. Hey, I love that you're asking me to come over and help you cart all those boxes to Goodwill this afternoon. Yet I've set a time aside to work on my novel or to go to the gym, or I've got client calls or whatever it is. And I appreciate your understanding. So you don't need to apologize. You can instead bring in gratitude. And last one for now, asking questions. Instead of apologizing, I'm sorry. What did you say again? You could say, can I ask a question? Or you could just ask the question. So again, this is a powerful way for you to play with language as a doorway into changing these old patterns of over apologizing and really rewiring and embodying the confidence and the sense of self-worth that comes when you're no longer over apologizing. And instead, you're willing to be heard, take up space, express emotions, set boundaries without apology. So there are 5 other examples, both in this list of what you can say instead of apologizing, 5 other ways we want to apologize. Grab those in the Facebook group. And these practices that I've been sharing with you, I'm always a fan of journaling too. And so you could take a situation where you said, I'm sorry, and you could journal. You know what I really wanted to say? What I really wanted to say was, F you, I can't believe you did that. Or it could be what I really wanted to say was, are you kidding me? Or WTF? Or why didn't they apologize? I was wondering. And let journaling be a place that you bring curiosity, compassion, kindness to yourself. Because in this journey of deconditioning and coming home to yourself, a journal can also be such a great space and place for you to unpack this and get really curious with yourself and unpack, what do you wish you had said, and what was driving you? What were those motivations? And what are all those scenarios when you said, I'm sorry? And what would you like to be saying instead? So journaling, I'm a big fan of. Play with that. And these tips that I shared with you today, again, remember, your words matter. Whether you're saying, I'm sorry, or excuse me, they matter. They impact everything, internally and externally. So my desire is that this conversation today has helped shine a big light on the over apologizing epidemic for you, so that you can move forward from here, having more ease and confidence with moving through your life unapologetically. And before we go today, I have a story for you. I loved this moment. It happened a few years ago. I was walking in the park and I passed this little girl with her mom, and she literally looks up at me and she howls at me. Oh, 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 oh. I loved it so much. I howled in response. Oh. She loved it. She started giggling. I was delighted. We were both just like smiling at each other. Her mom was cracking up, smiling at us both. And it got me thinking, what would it be like if instead of apologizing, instead of even saying namaste, we move through the world as women, even if it's not an explicit howl, there is this moment that we can share woman to woman of, I see you're wild. I see you're wild, woman. Because guess what? When we are connected to that wild woman, that wise woman within ourselves, who knows that she doesn't need to apologize for taking up space, for being who she is, there is a way that when we are connected to that, we radiate that out and we become a permission slip for other women to see another possibility, to see another path. So you, my dear, thank you for being a trailblazer. Thank you for opening up possibilities, both for yourself in your own life and all of those that your life will touch. Just like that girl who howled at me in the park. What would it be like if we moved through our days recognizing the wild and the wise in each other and being that permission slip to stop apologizing and being our unapologetic wild women selves? Woo, 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 woo. Mwah. Thanks for joining me today. And I look forward to the next time we connect and sharing a howl with each other. Bye bye.